Hi there, and welcome to another fast, loose watercolor painting. Today I have a 140-pound piece of paper that is 14 inches by 5 inches, and it's taped onto my board. And I have some clean water. We're going to use 3, maybe 4 colors today, but we're going to use some Payne's Gray and some burnt umber and maybe some yellow ochre. Maybe another color other than that, but we're going to limit our palette. It's really super limited palette, and I'm going to do most of this with 3/4 inch flat, but I have a couple of other watercolor brushes in case I need them or in case I feel like using them. I try to keep this very expressionistic and quick, super easy. So what we're going to do today is we're going to paint we're going to wet about the top 2/3 of our page here. So it's going to be wet, but it's not going to be soaked, okay? So it's going to be wet enough to carry the watercolor paint, but not so wet as in it's dripping. The other thing I have on hand, in case I require it, and you should have on hand also, is just a tissue or a piece of paper towel, whatever you might have. So I'm going to mix up quite a bit of Payne's Gray here. I'm actually not going to mix it up. I'm going to use it straight right out of the palette. Not very much water, and I'm going to, tap my brush. One of the things that you should always consider is that we tap our brush to get the paint off, and that's what we're really trying to do at this point, is get some pigment onto the page. And you see I have a little chunk right there. It's also fairly important that you use clean water every time. There we go, we're getting quite a bit pigment there. So this is going to be a gray sort of misty kind of a sky. I'm going to set that over to the side, and we're going to get this to run. I use a little pencil box to hold my board up while I'm letting the paint run down. You can use whatever you have at hand. Just gonna let that run down here. And if you have to encourage it by, tipping it up more, then you have to encourage it by tipping it up more. If you see any spots, like there's a spot, I don't know what I keep dropping in my painting here, but I keep dropping something. Must be off this brush. Just kick that out. I kind of had a cool effect dragging that brush across there like that. Anyways, you'll see this isn't running very well right here, so I'm just going to give that an extra little bit of help. Give it a little bit more water. You'll see it's starting to dry up over here. So just give that a little bit of assistance. And I'm going to tip my board to the left, and I'm going to get some of this pigment to run off to the left here. And then once this pigment gets down here, I'm going to tip my board back up the other way and get it to run back towards where the top was. And the great thing about watercolor painting is that you can do this, really you can do this right up until the point where it dries. Just sort of tipping it in whatever angle it is that you want it to go into. That one's looking not too bad there. And understand that this will continue to move right up until the point where there's no water left for it to move in. You see it's all wet across there, so it's moving pretty good now. I'm gonna lay it back down flat, okay? And I'm gonna keep my brush with no water on it, or very little water. I'm not picking up any extra water. And I'm gonna put in more than a couple. I'm gonna put in a bunch of trees. I'm gonna put in a large tree here, and some more smaller trees along here. And you'll figure out how much pigment you need. You know, all my paintings are usually inspired by some walk that I'm on or some trail that I hike. And over here, I'm going to put a significantly bigger tree in here. And again, you'll see how roughly I'm putting this onto the page. I'm not, you know, not putting it on nicely. I'm bashing the brush onto the paper to get the pigment to come off. And I'm going to keep doing that. I'm going to keep putting pigment in there until I think it's dark enough. And I'm getting pretty close to how dark I want it to be here. That's not too bad. And pick up a little bit more pigment. And you see, I'm always thinking about how much pigment is on there. Okay, I'm going to take this brush, one of the brush. Okay, I'm going to take my pair of scissors now. And most of you have seen this trick before, but if you take your pair of scissors and drag it along the paper, you make a small nick in the paper. And what that allows you to do is drag, it'll put some of the pigment into that little etched mark that you have. You put as many trees in here as you want. Don't, you know, really don't overdo it. I think one of the things that I see a lot of people do is they sort of overdo the amount of sticks that they put in here. Another good trick is, you know, sort of flick it like that. And you'll get the smaller end of the stick when you flick. So it comes to a bit of a point. Okay, that's not too bad at all right there. So one of the tricks that I like to employ quite often is preserving some white space between this and the foreground. And it adds a bit of a contour line in there, but it also doesn't allow this to run down into your foreground. In this painting, we're going to put a little edge of a pond, or the indication of where a pond might be. This is an actual real place that I go to that has a edge of a pond. It's actually a pretty big pond. But I'm just going to put a small indication of it, but I'm going to make it come almost all the way over here. Okay, so the way that we're going to do that is with Payne's Gray also. So I'm going to take a little bit of water, and I'm going to make this come all the way, almost all the way across the page. And this is wet on dry, where this was wet on wet. So I had a wet page and I introduced wet paint into it. This is going to be quite the opposite. This is wetness on a dry page. Okay, so we're going to let that sink in for a second. You can pick up a little bit more pigment if you want, and just tap the pigment just randomly sort of through that. Don't try to make that too consistent at all. Okay, we're just going to let that sink in there for a few more seconds. And then what we're going to do is we're going to wet this across here just a little bit. So I'm going to take my brush and I'm just going to wet this now and you'll see what'll happen is that dark line begins to migrate down into the area that had no pigment in it, but it does it very gradually. Got a little bit of a mark there. I'm just going to try to minimize a little bit. Okay, and we're just going to let that run down there. Don't do anything else to it right now. So the other thing that I'm going to do here right now is I'm going to pick up some burnt umber. Okay, so this is where we're going to put our field in, and we're going to put it in fairly dark. We're going to try to maintain our white space there as much as we can. Okay, so we're going to put it in kind of sketchy, would be the best way to describe it. So we're putting in the pigment, but we're not putting in huge amounts of it. And I'm keeping my flat brush moving and sort of scratching the surface. And if you think there's places where you want it to be darker, just don't wet the brush anymore. Pick up some more pigment and just add the pigment in to wherever it is that you think you need it to be darker. Okay, that's not too bad. So I'm going to go to the yellow ochre now, and this is my yellow ochre. And I'm going to rinse my brush off. And I'm just going to use the whatever water was left on that brush. I'm actually going to kick a little bit of that water off. And I'm going to pick up quite a bit of this yellow ochre. I'm going to make it fairly saturated. So this would not be a thin wash. This is fairly saturated paint. And I'm going to go right up to wherever those areas were that I put the burnt sienna on. And I'm just going to let that all run together. I'm going to try to preserve a little bit of that white space. Again, if I need more paint, I'm just going to grab some more yellow ochre. And yellow ochre and burnt sienna are great colors for doing any work in the fall. I really don't use much more than those two colors, along with Payne's Gray. And now I'm going to push this right up into there. You can let that bleed together however it is that you want to bleed together. I don't think this is quite dark enough for me over here, so I'm actually going to pick up some more pigment, some more burnt umber, and just streak it through there. You know, move your hand fairly quick, fairly long, like that. All right, one of the things that we're going to do now is we're going to add some detail to this area along here. So I'm going to actually take my my scissors, and I'm going to put in, there's some small bulrushes in this area. I shouldn't say small bulrushes, some of them are probably 4 or 5 feet tall, but I'm going to add those in with my scissors. Hopefully I can zoom in on that a little bit. Just like that, that's not too bad at all. So I'm going to take a little bit of my yellow ochre now, and I'm just going to put it along here. Let that sort of bleed together. Yeah, that painting's turned out not too bad, isn't it? One of the things I'm going to add to this is I'm going to add a little bit of back in here, I'm gonna add a little bit of sort of some scrubby grass back in here, just a little bit. That's not too bad. And I'm gonna do the same on this side. Not a lot of that. And now I'm actually gonna pick up some red, a little bit of red. So this is a fairly dry brush, and I'm going to just, I'm barely going to touch this. Barely, just barely touch it into wherever it is that it's wet. And we're just gonna let it bleed together, okay? So you're not actually touching it and making a big stroke. You're sort of touching it to allow the pigment to come off the brush. And then you're letting the water just carry it. And you'll see how it gives a bit of a highlight in there. And just let that go to wherever it is that it's going to go to. And you'll see we have some yellow ochre bleeding in through here now. It's giving it a really cool effect along there. Anyways, I hope your painting turns out awesome. I'll leave a picture of this at the end, and of course I'll put a picture of it at the beginning as the thumbnail. If you're currently a subscriber, I thank you very much. If you're not currently a subscriber, please consider subscribing to my channel. I love to hear from you, so if you have a question or a comment, please leave it in the comment section. I hope you have a great day painting, and we'll see you again next time.